Share. Okay. Can you see that? Somebody
Yes.
unmute? Okay. All right. Well, welcome to the Backcountry seminar. This is the 18th seminar I've done for the club. I think I haven't done them all by myself. One time we had Lori Nickel do one, and we had old Gordon Hall and John Beglin have helped, and Bill McGlynn have helped some with the weather in the past, but we didn't do one last year. But we'll try this Zoom thing this year. Um, so a little bit about myself. Like many of you, I always wanted to fly. When I was a kid, and grew up, and then when it came time to maybe do something, my eyes weren't good enough to get into the military or the Air Force or anything, and so I ended up. Well, I went and got an engineering degree, and then always wanted to fly. That was always the dream when you write down your goals and dreams. And then after my kids were just about out of high school, um, my wife bought me a discovery flight, and that did it. So I started in 1996, and then shortly after that, figured out, well, now I got my license. What am I going to do? I couldn't buy a plane, so I joined T-Craft, and I've been a member there since 1999. And I got downsized from HP, Hewlett Packard, and around 2003, 2004, and one of my friends that I've taken up in the backcountry a lot, he says, well, why don't you become an instructor? And I says, oh, yeah, that'd be a good idea. Be a good pastime and do something I love and be able to get paid a little bit for it anyway. So I started doing that, and then I got involved in the club in the board in 2009, and 2018 I was awarded AOPA Distinguished Flight Instructor, and that was basically a survey from all your students and everything. I don't even know what the survey was, but I was one out of two in Idaho that got it that year. And last year, or 2 years ago, I went around and did these air safety presentations. It was called Peaks to Pavement. It was almost exactly 2 years ago I did the one in Boise. And this will be similar, some of the same slides that I used then. So I've only flown single engine. I flew a twin a little bit, but mostly Cessnas and Beech a little bit, and a few other planes, Pipers, but mostly Cessnas in the club. So we're going to look at an overview of the backcountry. Just take a brief, quick look at the policy, and then do a little backcountry tour. Look at some skills and techniques to fly safely in the backcountry. Looking at the pilot, the airplane, the environment, airport research, backcountry etiquette, backcountry weather. And we'll take a break, and trying to keep this first part under about 45 minutes. The whole thing I'm trying to keep under an hour and a half or so, but it might run over. I tend to get a little bit windy. Then we'll look at density to altitude, performance, some rules of thumb, actually flying in the backcountry, looking at some terrain, canyon flying, approaches and landings, abort points, go-arounds, takeoff and departures, a little bit on survival, and then resources, and question and answer. So, what is backcountry? Well, around here it's flying over and under and in, like in the canyons and rugged mountainous terrain, in the deep canyons. In the live presentation, I usually ask, if anybody knows where this is, and most people, someone from Idaho usually does, but a lot of people don't know that this is the deepest canyon in the lower 48. Um, if you look at the bottom of the Snake, we're at 1,240 feet, and then the peak at He Devil Mountain is 940. So that puts it at 8,200 feet. So it's, well over a mile deep. And this view right now is looking pretty much right down, right down the canyon. Um, it's very unforgiving, very narrow margin for error. This is called, this right here is just north of the Flying Bee or Bernard. It's about, I think, 25 miles before the Middle Fork. This is the Middle Fork of the Salmon before it goes into the main Salmon. This is, a lot of the strips are narrow, challenging, high elevation. A lot of them are one way in, one way out. This happens to be Upper Loon, 5,500 foot, 2,500 foot length. It's actually pretty wide for, some of the strips. Part-time pilots, full-time mountains. Mountains don't need practice to bite you in the knickers. So this was John Goostrey, who is a retired FAA program manager. He used to teach the ground school of up in Chalice, the mountain flying clinic they had. This is just a real brief summary of, the T-craft policy. I'm not going to go into the policy itself as far as how many hours required at each level, but we basically break it down in 3 levels, and we use Galen Hanselman's relative hazard index that he comes up with in his book, and he's got a little chart over here. Well, it's in his book, but basically there's 3 factors in looking at runway length, runway elevation, proximity to mountains and terrain, trees, all these factors, and then he comes up with these numbers. And so we set the relative index at 1 to 9 for level 1, and level 2 we have at let's see if we can get this thing to change here to 10 to 19, and then level 3 is 20 to 28. And some of these on the borders, from a 9 to a 10, in some cases, I think, maybe a 10 could be a level 1, and like Warm Springs would probably be a level 2. And the same with Atlanta, Weatherby, and Graham. They're all pretty similar. But anyway, it works pretty good for the club. And yeah, so that's how we do it. So now I'll just take a little tour and look at some of the strips. Some of you may be familiar with some of these names. I know when I started, my brother-in-law, he was really big into fishing, and in fact, he's one of the reasons I got really interested in the backcountry, because he used to fly into these places and pay a lot of money, and he says, well, if you fly in, I'll teach you how to fish. So that worked out to be a pretty good deal. And I didn't know where these places were. But anyway, just kind of a orientation here. So here we are down here. We've got Garden Valley that's really close, Idaho City, Warm Springs, Smiley Creek, Stanley, Bruce Meadows. This blue here is the starting of the Middle Fork of the Salmon, and we got a lot of strips along there. We got Sulphur Creek, Indian Creek, Pistol Creek, Flying Bee. Got some along here. Then this tributary is Big Creek, and it runs up into the Big Creek airstrip and lodge. Then Johnson Creek's a real popular one. And then, we have several here. This is here's Donley, McCall's over here. So we have 284 airstrips in Idaho. 124 are public, 32 are state-owned, 22 forest, and 70 municipal, and 156 private. A lot of these private strips don't show up in any charts, but some of them do, and some of them, like Sulphur Creek, the Flying Bee, some of the private strips will allow people to go in. Then further north, here's this is the main salmon here. Here's where the Middle Fork comes in. And there's several along the main salmon that don't show up on the chart. And then above there we've got, well, one is Mackey Bar is another one, another place you can go in and, well, you used to be able to go in there and get breakfast and stuff and stay. You can still go in there and stay, but they want a minimum party size. Another favorite place of mine is up on the Selway. So we got Moose Creek and Sheer. And then we've got several up here north of the main salmon. So that kind of gives a orientation. Now we'll look at some level 1 strips. Garden Valley, that's where we're going to have our fly-in here in about a month. And in fact, June 19th. We have a breakfast on Saturday, the 19th, and some people will drive up, fly up, stay over Friday and camp out and then have breakfast in the morning. Then we have some contests, so we'll have a safety briefing and we have a beanbag drop. So we usually launch all the planes, get them going in a pattern, the fastest ones first, and then we get 3 drops of the beanbag, and there'll be some feedback if you're long or short. So whoever gets to hit the target wins the prize, which is an hour of free flight. Then everybody lands, and we have a marker here, and we'll have a landing contest. So it's a spot landing contest. Whoever lands closest to the mark, not being short of it. If you're short, you're disqualified. So that's always a lot of fun, that whole event. So mark that on your calendars, June 19th. Then up at another level 1 is Stanley. And, there's the beautiful Sawtooth Mountains. So traveling south from Stanley are the mountains. And then we got Redfish Lake. And then further on down is Smiley Creek. So Smiley Creek is a state-owned strip, really nice camping facility. Camping facility. Whoa, I'm going backwards here. Camping facilities there. There's a Smiley Creek Lodge is across the street here, across the highway. But they have showers and even have internet there. Look at the density altitude. Later on, we'll talk about density altitude, and you can sit down and calculate it and maybe go up and simulate it, but unless you're at a high density altitude strip like Smiley Creek, that's when you really realize what it's all about. Then some level 2 strips. We have Sulphur Creek. That's a real popular place to fly in for a breakfast. They also have cabins there you can stay in. On a given weekend or even a weekday, you'll find planes lined up on both sides of the airstrip there. And there's Carrie, one of the caretakers, Carrie and Valdine. And you can see the menu, yes or no. So no is a cup of coffee and a cookie maybe, and it costs you $10. And yes is a Sulphur Creek breakfast that you probably have to recalculate weight and balance after you leave there. Anyway, yeah, it's a big breakfast. Then going down the Middle Fork further is Indian Creek. So Indian Creek is almost a mile long. It's 4,700 feet. This is the Middle Fork of the salmon that's real popular for rafting, as you probably know, many of you. And when the water gets low, they can't float from the headwaters up at Dagger Falls, then they'll fly in the guests into Indian Creek and launch out of there. So here's a group here getting ready to launch. And I happen to be camped out there. They've got a couple really nice campgrounds. You can sit there right along the river. Actually, there aren't any designated campgrounds there, but they do have restrooms and and water at the Forest Service station. And the fishing's usually pretty good there too. Then there's several other ones going down, going down the Middle Fork. But the next one is the Flying Bee. That's privately owned by several owners, but you can go in there and you can go in for breakfast if you give them advance notice, and you can stay in the cabins too with advance notice. And usually I go in there in the fall and stay for a few days and have never had a problem. There's a lot of hunters in there, but they're out usually hunting up in the hunting camps, and there's usually room in the cabins. So there's the Flying Bee, the bee itself, and that's what it looks like on the other side of the river. Some of the cabins, and can't really see the lodge. The lodge is here, and this is their horse and hay barn, but these are cabins all around here. It's a really nice spot. And the rafters will stop there too for for ice cream and beer and ice, and maybe stay over for a night. Then going down and then turning up Big Creek drainage, we're at the Big Creek Lodge, and that's the approach in there. It's pretty much it's pretty much a one-way in, one-way out, like several of them. The lodge burned down. Not this lodge, this is a new lodge, but there was an old lodge there for several years, and it burned down 5 or 6 years ago, and this is the new lodge. It's really nice. It's beautiful. You can go in there for breakfast, and they have 2 or 3 nice rooms to stay, and they also have a more rusty cabin and a yurt that you can stay in. And there's also a Forest Service campground. You can't see it here, but it's right off the airstrip here. So that's a good place to go in and camp, and then go for breakfast or dinner if you get tired cooking. There's several other backcountry lodges. Idaho Aviation has a booklet out that has information, quite a bit of information on these different lodges and where they're at. I've stayed at a few of them, but most of them I haven't stayed at yet. Then other places, we have Johnson Creek. So Johnson Creek is a real popular place for fly-ins. Happened to be given instruction and really forgot that there was a big fly-in there, but we flew in and looked around, landed and took off again, and there was really no issue. Everyone was there doing their thing. But that, it's a nice, wide, long strip, but still there's a lot of accidents there. One, because of the traffic. There gets a lot of traffic, and then, it's a real popular strip people know about around the country, and, they'll pick up an article or something and say, oh man, this looks like a beautiful place to go, and then they'll go into, fly into McCall in the middle of the afternoon, fill up with gas, and then come and then find out what density altitude is all about, and sometimes they don't make it. There's been several missed go-arounds, crashes, and there was a really bad mid-air a few years ago. Then further up north, we have Moose Creek on the Selway. That's one of my favorites. There's 2 runways there, about a 4,000 foot and a 2,500 foot runway. If you use the rating system, the long one works out at level 2 and the short one a level 3. So and it's at the confluence of Moose Creek and the Selway. So this is Moose Creek, I believe. And then where it converges with the Selway's just a little bit bigger, but then it becomes quite a bit bigger. It's pretty low elevation. We're 2,400, 2,454. So 100-degree day, the density altitude is 5,500 feet. So you can get in and get out of there even on a pretty hot day. This is looking down the Selway. It's just a beautiful, pristine, river. And it's in the wilderness, in the Bitterroot Wilderness, so there's no mechanized equipment of any kind, even chainsaws. So the airplanes are the only mechanized equipment that that's allowed in the wilderness. Then we're looking at, well, there's several level 3 strips, but Cabin Creek is a pretty difficult level 3. It's definitely one way in, one way out, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later of actually flying in there. So that's what the runway looks like. You know, it looks like it's pretty curved, and it is, but it's not that bad. These are rubber slats they have in there to keep the water from running down and washing out the runway. They're like little dams. They don't make too much noise when you run over them. Then this is the big creek itself. So the Cabin Creek there is a creek called Cabin Creek about a mile north of Big Creek, but Big Creek's another beautiful river, pristine river. Okay, now we're going to take a look at a video of a go around and landing into the Flying Bee. So the Flying Bee, you can actually take off and land in either direction, but most of the time, you know, you would come over this ridge and come around. There's another airstrip here called Bernard, which we'll see in the video, and land this way. But you could do a go around, which you'll see we do. And you can also land the other way. So it pretty much depends on what the winds are doing, but if the winds are relatively calm, normally you land to the south. This runs north and south, and you take off to the north in the impassable canyon. Okay, so now we'll take a look at the video here. This is Tad Jones, and I guess a couple years ago.
How close to this hill do you want me to get?
We want to be right over the bit to the right, just where it starts, it's level and then it drops off, just past where it drops off. We want to fly over the top of that. Almost right straight ahead, but we want to cross over that ridge.
Okay. Flying Bee area traffic, Skyline 901 X-ray. We are left downwind, landing upstream, Flying Bee.
Now hold your altitude. Hold some altitude. We don't want to descend that. We want to go past this ridge.
Okay.
Jim, when you
right over the top of it here.
do the share screen, there's a checkbox down on the bottom of the dialog that says
not
share
over the top of
desktop
the flat
audio.
spot, but just about straight ahead where you're heading now.
Okay.
Then there's the next ridge is the one we're going to go past that next ridge and then turn around.
Oh, in the canyon.
In the canyon, yeah.
Okay.
All right, now you can start descending a little bit.
Dang it.
Okay, I got 20 degrees of flaps in. So my gumps.
Huh.
All right, descend a little bit more.
Yeah, shoot. Seem to be locked up here.
Right about
here.
Yep.
I'm at 90. Coordinated turns.
Well, shoot.
Down about 85.
All right, yeah, we're a little high.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go full flaps.
Down, full flaps.
Okay, sorry about that. I think I had that box checked, but let me try again. Yeah, I got the share sound checked. I'm not sure what's happening here.
We could hear it, Jim. We could hear it.
Oh, you can hear it?
I could hear it.
I
Okay.
didn't hear it.
Yeah, I could hear it.
I couldn't.
That's weird.
I could hear fine.
Okay. Well, maybe turn your, I don't know, whoever can't hear it, maybe turn your volume up on your unit. Okay, we'll continue then.
I think we better do a go around.
Okay.
We got a little bit too high.
Okay.
Okay, so those who can't hear it, we're doing a go around. We were coming in too high. So we're fast forwarding here. We'll give it another shot. But as you can see, you know, there's a lot of illusions.
We go just a little bit further too. Before we turn, we got to get a little bit lower.
Okay. I'm going to go here.
All right.
You know, this is an
Out
example
some power
where
and get a little bit lower.
you can look at things, maybe watch YouTubes, study an airstrip, but unless you go in with someone that's really familiar with it, you can get all out of whack.
So, Jim, what was the
Be a little bit
what
to
was
the
the
right.
fundamental difference? Was it just the way it fly from the wing when you turn?
How's
or
that looking, Jim?
what
That's
was
looking
happening?
good. Yep. Yep. All right. Bring out some power now. Bring out some power.
Bring it out?
Out. Yeah.
Okay. My gosh, this is a weird sight picture.
He said this is a weird sight picture. And you know, a lot of the strips are weird and different till you get used to it. I mean, flying close to the canyon walls is pretty intimidating at first.
Oh, not too bad.
Yeah, that was nice. That was
I'm really
nice.
glad we did a go around though, because
Yeah, we were too high.
we would have had too much energy.
Yeah, we were a little too high.
Okay. Okay, now we'll look at some skills and techniques. So one is to know yourself, be honest of your capabilities, your attitude, know your aircraft, know the environment. Your knowledge and skill and experience, they don't really make up for bad judgment and bad decisions. No matter how smart you might be, you could really screw up bad. Good judgment usually comes from experience, and experience usually comes from mistakes or bad judgment. And it's those you never want to do that again. But hopefully, you can learn from other people. Stay proficient, never become complacent or overconfident. Remember, part-time pilots, full-time mountains. It's along the same lines of an instrument pilot staying proficient. Shooting a low approach or something. You don't just go out there and do that after a couple months of not doing anything. You got to, stay on your game. Then set and adhere personal limits. So one thing you can do to, find out about your airplane is to load it up to the weight that you're going to be, flying. If you're going to go camping with some friends and have it near gross weight, then get it loaded up and go out and find out some things. Find out where it stalls at. Be proficient at slow flight. Set up an approach. You can all do this. You can do this at altitude, and then you can go in and practice at some smaller, safer strips. Be proficient at a stabilized approach, short field spot landings. A lot of times you don't have to exactly hit the very end of the runway, because a lot of these are not that short, but you definitely want to hit the spot that you want to hit. You don't want to be landing halfway down the runway and find out it's a no-go around and you've landed too long. And you can calculate your takeoff performance and then go out and actually compare it and see what you get. And same with climb rate. You might figure you can get off the ground in 50 feet, but wherever you're going, you might have to climb at a higher rate than the terrain to get out of wherever you're at. And you can again practice at a short strip. So there's a nice little chart that Lori Nichols has on her webpage for free, and I've got a copy of this too. But it's similar to what you would probably have done if you've taken instrument training. If you go out and find your different configurations and find your pitch and your power and your airspeed at different configurations. At cruise speed, canyon speed, which is going to be slower than cruise, so you're not making so much noise. Cruise setup, we'll talk later about the 20-80 rule, and then your actual landing configuration and descent, and your final landing approach, and then taking off VX and VY. So get your plane loaded up and go up to the equivalent density to altitude and perform these tests. There's some other things that you can do is to find out your stall speed or your minimum controlled airspeed. So minimum controlled airspeed is just about when the stall horn is going off, and then find out the margin between that and when it actually stalls. And you also can do that in some turns, because some of those airstrips you're banking, on final approach you might be banking 20-30 degrees, or you may want to find out how much you can bank going slow to make a canyon turn. And you can practice this at altitude. So Lori, there's a supercub.org they've been having these hangar hump day presentations, and Lori does a really nice presentation on how to work those numbers, and also a lot on performance and flying in the backcountry. Okay, then your airplane itself. Fortunately in T-Craft, our planes are pretty well taken care of, but you definitely don't want wheel fairings in the backcountry. But you do want to check your brakes and wheels and tires. Windscreen, make sure it's clean. Shoulder harnesses, we're taking care of pretty good there. Prop, power plant. A lot of times we're not going to be pulling the cowling and looking at some of these things, but battery, maybe you don't want to go up with a weak battery. Then there's some other things to bring along, extra can of oil or two, some cleaner, a toolbox, tow bar, fire extinguisher, tie down ropes. We have some in the club. Make sure they're in the plane if you're going to go out. And I think we had a baggage net, but I think it disappeared. Then the environment. So you want to learn as much as you can about the airstrip that you're planning to go into, and you can look at. Then you want to look at your routes and outs. I fly IFRR. I follow roads and rivers. Look at your approach and departure, your descent and climb gradients required at different airstrips, and that's part of your research. And then of course weather. AOPA and the RAF Foundation has this neat little chart that's kind of a checklist and takes you through a whole bunch of good stuff that you should look at and prepare for, and I've got that. And it's also on the RAF webpage, which I've got a link to later. But that's a really good guide to go through and make sure you've covered all your bases and checked all the boxes. So route planning, very seldom in the backcountry are you going from point A to point B direct. And even flying, say, like from Nampa or Boise over to Riggins or someplace, or not Riggins, over eastern Idaho, you may not want to go straight across the mountains. You probably want to go down and fly along the roads or something. You have an out if something happens. Same thing in the mountains. So instead of a straight line, you're probably going to be following, the drainages, the rivers, the roads. Might take a little bit longer, but you have an out if something happens. Or if you get into some low ceilings, you might be able to get out or get back if it's not a perfectly clear sky. Fuel, fuel considerations. You might be at least an hour or so away from it's a place to get fuel if you're in the middle of the backcountry and you might be going in somewhere and might have to fly around for a while for the clouds to clear or something. So you have to plan your fuel. It's definitely more than a minimum half an hour and probably even more than an hour. So it's a trade-off. Like in a 182, you don't want to be taking 6 hours of fuel back to where you only need maybe an hour or two flight, especially when you're camping. But anyway, look at your outs and your alternatives. So some of the things you can use, of course, your sectional charts. The Division of Aeronautics has a nice airport guide. The Fly Idaho book's a good source for the airports themselves. Idaho Aviation website has a lot of good stuff on it. Webcams. They have pilot reports, updated pilot reports constantly. And then the Recreational Aviation Foundation has an airport guide that covers some of Idaho, but covers the whole country. And of course, there's YouTube and Facebook, but I call that good, bad, and the ugly. There is some good videos on there, but also some pretty poor and not recommended approaches. And there's nothing substitutes training, good training. So here's a little app, this Idaho Airports app here, and that's free. You can download that, and you get the little charts here that are pretty nice. Then of course the Fly Idaho book, and Amy Hoover's Mountain Canyon and Backcountry Flying. That is kind of the new Backcountry Bible. It doesn't have anything about, well, it does have a few things on some specific strips, but it covers everything and 10 times more than what we'll be talking about tonight. It's an awesome book. It took them over 2 years to come up with that book, and it's great. I mentioned the Idaho Aviation Association, so they also have the different services that are at the airports. Then this is a snapshot of the RAF Airport Guide, and they have public use airports and then some conditional ones. I guess the conditional is they're not public yet, but I'm not sure what that means. But they do some similar things to the Fly Idaho book, where you can go in and get pilot reports and talk to people that have been in these different spots. So I was surprised when I looked at this more. There's a ton in Arkansas, and they're all over the country. So it's not just Idaho that has some pretty nice strips. Each public or state-owned strips have the operating procedures, and you can get those off the state aeronautics webpage, or you can get them off the Idaho Aviation webpage. And they go into details on the route planning, approach, departure, unique traffic patterns at the state-owned strips. So I'm going to buzz through this really quick, but just to look at how you might approach looking at say Indian Creek. Of course, you got your chart. That doesn't give you too much information. It gives you a little bit, but then you want to maybe look at the Fly Idaho book, and you get a little bit more information on it. None of them really tell you how to approach and how to depart, or maybe what the winds are going to be doing at a certain time of day. But the Fly Idaho book, it gives you a lot of good information. It gives you a topo map, and it also gives you an elevation map. Tells you what the slope is and what the elevation is each end of the runway. Then you can pull up Google Earth and get a better view of it. So you can do some research on the airstrips. Well, a little bit about the backcountry etiquette. So we're really lucky to have all this at our back door. I mean, we are so lucky. There's people that come from literally all over the world. I've met people from Germany, Australia, you name it. They come to the Idaho backcountry. So one thing, it's getting a lot more popular, and a lot more people are doing, touch and goes in the backcountry. Um, get a lot of people doing crazy things. I saw someone last year taking off the wrong way. I mean, the wrong way or the not normal way out of Big Creek, and then doing a high speed buzz over it, and that just really pisses a lot of people off, especially the Forest Service. So keep doing that kind of stuff, and we're at risk of shutting some of these down. Keep the prop tonnage down in the canyons. Avoid formation or gaggle flying. You get everybody and going around just bagging airstrips. I mean, people are doing that, and they're kind of abusing it, but that's what some people like to do. So, but if it gets out of hand, one thing, it's causing a lot more accidents. There were, I think last year, 4 or 5 accidents at Mile High. A couple of them weren't reported, but need to respect the backcountry. Get on your, if you don't chatter on the frequency. I mean, use a different frequency. There's one called, you hear somebody say going to the fingers. Well, that's 123.45. And then the other thing, if you're at a place and there's people camped and stuff, be conscious of your prop wash. Don't go blasting somebody's tent over. And leave no trace. I went camping in a few spots last year, not aircraft backcountry, but it was disgusting. People just camping everywhere. It was disgusting. And like I say, if we abuse the privileges, we might have them taken away. Like the Grand Canyon. You used to be able to fly around the Grand Canyon, but not anymore. So it's basically being respectful and following the golden rule. All right, we'll take a little bit quick look here at weather. The weather in the canyons is, you have your regular weather. You got systems that come in, storms and things, highs and lows and fronts. But there's some unique things in the backcountry that you really can't. You can. I guess you can't predict, but you can read and try to understand. But you got to realize that a lot of things are not forecast, like valley fog, fog itself, canyon turbulence, smoke. Bill McGlynn, has done a couple great courses that are on our club webpage on the index section on weather. And then realize that if you're camped somewhere, there's probably not going to be cell coverage or internet coverage. So if you're somewhere for, a few days, you're not sure what the weather's going to be, when you leave. But there is, at 10,000 feet, you can get cell coverage. Last year, I was heading up to Big Creek, and it was totally fogged in. So I pulled up, I looked at that, looked on IAA and got the webcam, and then I could see that Sulphur Creek was totally open. So I went to Sulphur Creek instead. The internet, you can get the weather and things on it. And there is internet a few places. Johnson Creek has internet, Smiley Creek, and in-flight, ADS-B, the weather, the FIS.B weather portion of it, it's ground-based, line of sight. So you're not going to get that in the mountains, but if you have Sirius XM weather, you could get satellite-based weather. Some rules of thumb for the backcountry: wind, heat, and turbulence, they're out to get you. And it can change quickly. There can be little microsystems, things that aren't forecasted pop up. Usually those things will go away quickly, but some not always. This is Dick Williams, one of his quotes: "You can't beat the weather. The deck is stacked. Mother Nature routinely cheats and always wins." So in the book, Amy Hoover, and it's actually Dick Williams helped write that book too. He's got a lot of these little sayings in there. This is an example of some morning fog. It was clear skies, pretty much flying all the way up there. Then we get up there and, the whole valley socked in. So I'm not sure if it was this time or not, but one of the times, we diverted and went over to Grangeville and waited it out for a few hours and then came back and it was clear. Another time it wasn't quite this bad and we found a hole and got down and could see the runway and were able to land. But after after a good storm in the summertime, usually the next day or so after it clears up, there's going to be a lot of moisture and you're going to get this fog. This is another example. I think this is over the main salmon drainage. So, you can be flying over this and you can hear people flying underneath of it. And underneath there's probably, in some cases, 1,500-foot clearance. But if you're underneath, where you're going to get out, or if you're above it, how you're going to get down. So you need to know where you're at and kind of know the geography and the terrain. A lot of times when it gets like this in the middle fork, down by the Flying Bee at lower elevations, it's clear. So this would be like what it looks underneath of it. So it could be pretty safe to fly underneath for a while, unless you're, going up grade and the ceilings keep getting lower and lower. Then you better turn around and go back or go down to lowering terrain. Smoke. Man, it's getting worse every year. And last year I was flying back from Moose Creek and that smoke came on so fast it was unbelievable. And I ended up having to, I'm not sure this is it or not, but it was worse than this. It was more like this. And it was even worse than this. One thing about smoke is horizontally, especially if you're looking into the sun, or if it's blinding. So you might be able to see down it, but once you get in it, then horizontally you won't be able to see. So you got to be really careful about smoke. And this was at Shear, and it was clear when we went in there. Then a couple of days later, the smoke rolled in, and it stayed there for about 2 days. Or 3 days, actually. We were there a day longer than we had planned to be. Another of Dick Williams quotes here is, wind doesn't blow, it sucks. And so if you're good at reading the water, how water flows through the rivers, in the middle of the river, in the narrow part, it's going to be pretty turbulent, but closer to the edge, it'll be calmer. So the same thing in the canyons. I mean, it's not exactly the same thing, but the air flows. Well, this is not a canyon, but in the canyons, the air is flowing down the canyons. When the canyons gets narrower, you're going to get higher winds. This is an example of the mechanical or orographic lift. So it's pretty straightforward. The air's coming over and it's going to come over the mountain, and then you're going to get a downdraft. So in a 25 knot wind aloft, which is actually recommended not to go higher than that, faster, or go if the wind is higher than that. You can get on the lee side, you can get a 2,000 foot per minute downdraft. So you definitely want to stay out of the downdrafts and off the lee side. This is out of Amy's book, and some of these slides were from Amy when I did the presentation a couple years ago, and she let me use some of her slides. She's got some really nice slides. But you have the thermal effects in the canyon, rising, and then there's some orographic effects. There's not too much interference. If you're flying down the canyon and you want to get some lift, then you're flying on the sunny side of the canyon here and getting some lift. But as you get more winds aloft, and you get some of those mixing with the thermal winds coming up, then you start getting some turbulence. And as you get more wind, then you get even more turbulence. And this is, doesn't consider the fact of the wind going down through the canyons. So then, this is a kind of an illustration of that, where you have, well, it's where everything converges. You got, the thermal, you've got the actual winds aloft and how they're affecting the canyons. And as a canyon narrows, you're going to get Venturi effects, you're going to get stronger winds. And then the diurnal, that's basically in the morning in a long canyon with lots of elevation, the wind tends to flow upstream, and then in the evening it tends to flow downstream. That's not always the case, but in fact, Sulphur Creek is opposite. You can almost, set your clock to about 11 o'clock when the winds are going to start going downstream, and then they get pretty strong in the middle of summer. And then here's an example of, taking off into the wind, but you're on the lee side, and you may get off the ground and then find yourself in a downdraft, and you may not make it. Thomas Creek is a real good example of that, where if you would take off into the wind, you're going to hit a downdraft. So the options are, taking off downwind, and then you have to know, how much downwind you can take off into. And yeah, Amy does a really good job. She's in this Hanger Hump Day presentation, and she does about an hour on weather, and she goes into it quite a bit of detail. Okay, let's take a break. And any questions? We'll stop the screen sharing here for a minute.
Hey, Jim, this is Ivan. Do you mind if I just say a few words before we go any further? You can't fly in a backcountry till you're checked out. And that's a pretty big deal. There's a level 1, level 2, level 3 checkout. Jim talked about those airports. So I just did want to mention that because it is a big deal. And if you go to our website, off to the left, there's the site index. You can find the T-Craft's backcountry flying policy. And so read through that and see what your requirements are. There's our requirements, and they all involve flying with an instructor. So definitely a big deal. Great presentation, by the way, Jim. I just want to throw that in there. People didn't know where that policy was, so they could read it. And that's it. Otherwise, great stuff, man. Thanks, Jim.
Okay, you bet. Yeah, so take a little break and get a drink of water or whatever, and then we'll come back, and or if anybody has any questions, because we're about halfway through, I think.
I do have one question, and it's kind of along the lines of what Ivan brought up. How does the club evaluate things that are not in Idaho and therefore not on that list of level 1, level 2, level 3? And specifically, I'm thinking of Minam Lodge over in Oregon, which is very close, but isn't on that list.
Yeah. Well, you can work through the Idaho or Fly Idaho book, and I think in a situation like that, you need to get approval from the board. I've been into Minam, and it's a pretty tough strip.
I would say it's a 2.
I'd say it's a level 3 strip.
Is it a 3?
Huh?
Yeah, you're probably right. Somewhere between a 2 and a 3, you're right. Yeah, I've been in there quite a bit, but not
it's
with
definitely a
plane.
2. I'd have to look at the numbers again. The other thing that right next to it is Reds, and Reds is it's longer and would be an easier strip to get into than Minam. But yeah, I've been in there a couple times. It's pretty tricky.
The bottom line, like Jim just said, is if it's not on that list, you need to talk to a board member, and we'll help you work through those numbers and see if it's a level 1, 2, or 3. So that's the right answer. It's not on the list. Just check with the board. We'll work through it and help you with that, because
that makes sense.
We changed gears slightly, and you'll hear about this more in the general meeting. We just paid our insurance bill for the next year, just under $63,000 for a year. And that's a lot of money. And that's because we crashed an airplane a few years ago, and some other things, which we'll talk about more. And I don't want to be negative here, but the point is that we have to be ultra conservative. So don't take any chances with our club airplanes, because if we bend one of these in the next year, the reality is that the club's going to look a lot different, and it's going to be a lot more painful. And none of us want that, because it's really good right now, but that's a big paycheck we just wrote. So I agree with Jim 100%. If it's not on that list, you're not checked out to that level, talk to the board / your instructor that checked you out and whatever level you're at, and we'll go from there. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, and another thing too is, the requirements to get checked out, say for level 2, I think it's 7 strips, and you have to previously have been into made 20 takeoff and landings in. Oh, I've got it here. At 7 different level 1 strips, and then you get checked out a minimum of 6 level 2 strips. Well, there's a lot more level 2 strips on there, and I'd say, if you're going to go into the more difficult level 2 strips, you should get checked out going into those strips too. And then level 3, it requires 50 takeoff and landings at 8 different level 2 strips, and then a minimum of 6 different level 3 strips. But I highly recommend to get checked out in every level 3 strips that you go in. Because some of them there's a lot of difference in one level 3 versus another level 3. And we've got some good instructors, John Baglian, Gordon Hall, myself, James Patterson, that some have been in a lot of these strips. So definitely get checked out. Okay. Well, I'm going to take a little break here, and then I'll be right back, and we'll start into phase 2.